Here at the Abyssal Logs, we've received hundreds, now growing into thousands, of stories from offshore workers, commercial divers, and merchant mariners from all over the world. Thank you to those who have shared your logs and continue to do so. We're also finding no end to the stories being shared elsewhere in the maritime industry. You might have noticed that, at sea, few paranormal stones have been left unturned. Unexplained lights beneath the hull, sounds on sonar frequencies that shouldn't exist, rogue waves, ghost ships, disappearances in the dead zone, radar echoes, or just the sheer, crushing terror of isolation. Chances are, some veteran of the North Sea or the Pacific can tell you all about the time they saw something in the black water that science just couldn't explain. Out of all the stories we are reading, possibly the most common subject is incidents on isolated oil rigs. Well, more specifically, that the decompression chambers or subsea habitats are wrong. With so much material to work with, I've been doing my best to organize everyone's stories, then map out future episodes. Going through my files, I realized that a large number of very strange and unusual stories seem to come from one specific line of work. And no, it's not the Navy, but the world of saturation diving. Operating at depths where sunlight never reaches, saturation work is brutal. Divers live pressurized in tiny chambers for up to 28 days, breathing a mixture of helium and oxygen. It is an environment where a microscopic error results in instant horrific death. The history of offshore oil exploration includes a number of dark chapters, from the Bifford Dolphin disaster, where explosive decompression killed 4 men instantly, to the Piper Alpha collapse. If for no other reason, these brutal fatality rates, all centralized in metal cans at the bottom of the ocean, might explain why saturation chambers are so haunted. And according to the following accounts, some of these things down there are just waiting for someone to drop in. This is the Abyssal Logs, and these are true stories about strange things in the deep. This first story was sent to me by an industrial diver under the handle Satdiva1. In it, he recalls a disturbing incident he and his team witnessed while working in the North Sea inside the diving bell. He writes, "The story I am about to share is extremely bizarre and almost made me quit the profession entirely. To start off, I was on a contract in the Norwegian sector back in 2018. At the time, I was living in the transfer chamber, docked to the main system on the ship's deck. If you Google it, a diving bell is basically a reinforced metal sphere, about the size of a small bathroom, that lowers you to the bottom. My shift was the graveyard shift, the dead of night. I was the bellman, the guy who stays inside the bell monitoring the diver who goes out to work. The chamber is cramped, full of valves, gauges, and has 3 small viewports made of thick glass. It was a Tuesday, around 3 a.m., and we were at 180 meters depth, about 600 feet. The darkness outside is absolute, except for the bell's external floodlights. I was monitoring the umbilical of Diver 2, who was outside doing a flange repair. Everything was quiet, except for the hiss of the radio and his breathing. Suddenly I heard a metallic impact. Clang. It wasn't from the ship above. It was right on the wall of the bell, inches from my head. I thought Diver 2 had swung a tool or drifted back to the bell without warning. I thought it was funny. I was about to curse him out over the cums, until I looked at the video monitor. Diver 2 was 30 meters away from the bell, working on the pipeline. He wasn't even close to me. I froze. I asked over the radio, "Diver 2, did you drop anything? Any debris falling?" He answered, in that high-pitched Donald Duck voice caused by the helium, that no, everything was clear. Then I heard it again. Clang. This time it was on the AFG viewport, the window that looks out into nothing, into the open ocean. I turned slowly. Remember, at this depth, the pressure is so immense it would crush a standard submarine. Nothing biological should be able to hit the metal with force. When I looked through the viewport, I saw nothing but black water and sediment particles. But then, the external light flickered. Once, twice, and died. Now, I believe in the supernatural, but down there, your first fear is mechanical failure. If the light died, it could be a short circuit. But then, the wheel of the bottom hatch, the one we used to enter and exit, started to turn. The valve wheel began to move on its own. There are 2 things to note here. 1. The external pressure is crushing. It is impossible to open that door from the outside without equalizing. 2. The latch has a hydraulic safety lock. It does not turn on its own. I screamed to topside control. "Control, we have a hatch failure." Control replied that all sensors were reading normal. Then, the thing stopped. Total silence. Diver 2 asked to return to the bell, sensing something was wrong. I retracted his umbilical as fast as I could. When he entered the bell and we sealed the bottom hatch, he was pale. I asked, "Did you see anything out there?" He looked me in the eyes, terrified, and said, "Something cut my helmet light. And when I looked back, I saw something blocking your viewport. We brought the cage up without finishing the job." When the bell was hoisted back to the ship and docked to the decompression chamber, the technicians came to do maintenance. I was the last one out of the bell, and that's when I heard the technicians outside, on the deck, shouting. I went to the chamber viewport to see what was happening. The techs were pointing at the exterior of the diving bell, the metal sphere that had just come up from the bottom. There were marks, deep gouges in the reinforced steel, not scratches from rocks. drag marks as if something with diamond claws had tried to hold the bell down while we were ascending. And the worst part, on the aft viewport where I heard the knocking, there was a handprint, a human hand, but double the normal size, printed in the grease and oil on the glass. On the outside, no one mentioned it in the official report. They called it debris damage, but I know what I heard, and diver to quit the following week. The next story comes from a first mate on an oil tanker in the Atlantic. He recounts how the crew began to realize that something was on board with them, something that had the terrifying ability to mimic the crew. He writes, "I've worked on merchant vessels for 10 years. The sea plays tricks on your mind. Isolation does that. But nothing was as intense as my voyage in 2021. We were 3 days from the nearest coast. On the first night of my midnight watch, I was on the bridge, drinking coffee. I looked out onto the bridge, winged the external balcony and saw the chief engineer standing out there, staring at the sea. It was raining and blowing a gale. I was confused. The chief was supposed to be asleep. I went out to call him in, worried he might slip. I opened the door. The wind and rain hit me. I shouted, 'Chief, what are you doing out here?' The figure turned its head. Toward me it was him, the same boiler suit, the same face. He smiled a strange smile, way too wide, and then simply vaulted over the railing. My heart stopped. I ran to the rail and looked into the dark water. Nothing. I sounded the man overboard alarm. The whole ship woke up. We killed the engines, turned the ship around, deployed the searchlights. We did a head count, a muster. I was shaking, ready to explain that I saw the chief commit suicide. And then, the chief engineer walks onto the bridge, looking sleepy, asking what the hell was going on. He was alive. Dry, he had just woken up. I told the captain what I saw. They thought I was hallucinating from fatigue. They called off the search and we resumed course. I felt like an idiot. I believed them until the same thing happened to the cook. 2 days later, the cook was in the galley, alone, prepping breakfast. He heard my voice calling him from the corridor. "Hey, cookie, coffee ready," he yelled back. "Yeah." He looked up and saw me standing in the doorway. He said I walked in, grabbed the pot, and walked out toward the lower deck. The problem: I was on the bridge at that exact moment, 2 decks up, talking on the radio with the harbor master. Things got worse. Crew members saw each other in impossible places. Shadows in the corridors. Voices on the internal coms mimicking our names. But the final straw was when we found the electrician's cabin. He was on duty, but we heard the sounds of a struggle coming from his room. We went there, thinking he was fighting someone. The door was locked. We opened it with the master key. The room was empty, but on the walls, there were wet handprints. Salt water. The marks went from the floor all the way up to the ceiling, as if someone soaking wet had climbed the walls in a panic. The electrician swore he locked the door when he left. After that, we started moving in pairs. No one went anywhere alone. When we reached port, 3 crew members resigned immediately, myself included. The sea has things that don't want to be found, and sometimes they climb aboard. This next story is short, but it sends shivers down the spine of any radio operator. It was submitted by a rig operator in the Gulf of Mexico. It was 2015, a stormy night. The VHF radio is our lifeline out here. You hear everything: other ships, the Coast Guard, interference. But that night, Channel 16, the international emergency channel, was strange. I received a call. It was just static at first, then a whispered voice. "Platform Bravo, open the door. It's cold." I thought it was a prank from a nearby fishing boat. I replied, "Station calling Bravo, identify yourself." The voice replied immediately, but now it sounded like it was inside the radio room, even though it was coming from the speaker. I'm on the ladder. Look down. The radio room has a window that overlooks the metal grating stairs that go down to sea level, 100 feet below. I went to the window. I hit the searchlight and pointed it at the ladder. There was no boat docked. There was no one on the ladder. But the ladder was shaking, vibrating violently, as if something very heavy was climbing it, rung by rung, rattling the metal against the structure. I locked the radio room door and closed the blinds. The sound of metal banging continued coming up until it reached my level, stopped right in front of my door, and then silence. I didn't sleep that night. This final story comes from the bowels of an icebreaker ship. Much like hospitals, the engine rooms of large vessels are loud, dangerous, and apparently very paranormally active places. A mechanical engineer, who we'll call Chief, said that on his last route in the Arctic, the team started noticing their tools disappearing. That's normal in any workshop, right? You drop a wrench, it vanishes. But then, they started finding the tools days later. They were being placed inside the pistons of the spare engine, carefully lined up by size inside a sealed engine block. To put the tools there, you'd need hours to dismantle the cylinder head, but no one had done that. The incident that made the team request a transfer happened in the generator room. One of the greasers was doing the night rounds. He went down to check oil levels. The generator is deafening. You wear ear defenders all the time. He said he felt a hand grab his shoulder hard. He turned around thinking it was me or the second engineer warning him of danger. There was no one, he was alone in the hold, but when he looked at the shoulder of his boiler suit, there was a grease stain, a fresh stain, in the perfect shape of a hand with 3 fingers missing. Later, we found out in the ship's old logs that, in the 90s, an engineer lost 3 fingers in that very generator in an accident. He died of blood loss before they could get him to the surface. It seems he never stopped working. I've had my own share of scares. Once, I was monitoring the pressure gauges and I heard, clearly, the sound of the watertight door, that massive, wanton steel door slam shut behind me. The sound is unmistakable. Boom. I ran to check, thinking we had an emergency or a flood. The door was open, latched on the hook, but the closing wheel was spinning on its own, slowly, grinding rust. I didn't investigate. I went back to the control room and stayed there until the sun came up. It's a lonely place to be when the lights flicker. So, anyone want to apply for the next opening on an oil rig? For the folks not in the industry, the offshore money is great. They call it golden handcuffs. You get paid very well, but you pay with your sanity and isolation. I really wonder what that thing outside the diving bell was. The pressure at that depth would turn a human being into red paste in milliseconds. So, what knocked on the window? What left a handprint? Maybe there are things in the ocean that evolved, not just biologically, but spiritually, in a way we don't understand. If you have your own stories from the sea, rigs, or heavy industry, please share them in the comments or email us. We would love to read your log. Thank you for watching, for liking and subscribing. It goes a long way to help the channel grow. Stay safe and stay out of the dark water. I will see you in the next episode.